The moment you realize you've been left behind is quieter than you'd expect. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a soft beep, 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 and an empty chair beside your hospital bed. I remember staring at it, waiting for him to come back, convincing myself he had just stepped out for coffee or a phone call, anything but the truth. The fluorescent lights above me hummed, cold and steady, casting everything in a pale, unforgiving glow. My throat felt dry, my body heavy, like gravity had decided I wasn't worth holding gently anymore. A nurse walked in, clipboard in hand, her smile polite but distant. "Your husband checked out a few hours ago," she said, like she was telling me the weather. Checked out. Like a hotel. Like I was something temporary. Something disposable. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice not to break, my fingers tightening around the thin hospital blanket as the words settled into my chest like something final. He didn't just leave. He erased me. The silence that followed was louder than anything he had ever said, louder than the promises, louder than the apologies, louder than the nights I told myself things would get better. My wrist throbbed faintly beneath the sleeve of my gown, and I pulled the fabric down instinctively, even though there was no one left to hide from. Or so I thought. The door opened without a knock. I didn't look up right away. I expected another nurse, another form, another reminder that I was alone. But the air shifted. It's the only way I can explain it. Like the room had suddenly remembered how to hold its breath. I lifted my eyes slowly, and that's when I saw him. He stood just inside the doorway, tall, still, dressed in a dark suit that didn't belong in a place like this. Everything about him was controlled, precise, like every movement had already been decided before it happened. His gaze moved across the room once, taking everything in, before settling on me. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't sympathy. It was something sharper, something that saw too much. I felt it land on my sleeve, on the way I held my arm too close to my body, on the things I hadn't said out loud. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes quiet against the tile, and stopped just far enough that I could breathe, but close enough that I couldn't ignore him. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low, steady, like he already knew the answer and was just waiting to hear me say it. My instinct was automatic. "I'm fine," I whispered, the same lie I had used 100 times before, the same shield that had never really protected me. His eyes didn't soften. They didn't look away. If anything, they sharpened, like my words had confirmed something instead of hiding it. For a second, neither of us moved. The machine beside me kept beeping, counting seconds I didn't know how to fill anymore. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and turned slightly away, his voice dropping just enough that it felt private even though I could still hear it. "Find him," he said. That was it. No anger. No threats. Just a decision. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and looked at me again, really looked this time, like he was seeing something worth staying for. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand anything anymore. But for the first time since I woke up, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something was about to change. I did not ask who he was because something in me already knew the answer would change everything, and I was not ready for that. So I focused on smaller things like the way his presence made the air feel heavier, steadier, like the room had been anchored after drifting too long without direction, and I realized my hands were trembling again, so I curled them into the blanket to hide it. But he noticed anyway. Of course he did. His eyes missing nothing as they moved from my face to my wrist, and back again, not invasive, not careless, just precise, like he was reading a language I had spent years trying to erase. "You should call someone," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper because silence had become safer than speaking, safer than saying the wrong thing, safer than hoping. But he did not move, did not reach for the phone again. Instead, he stepped closer and pulled the chair beside my bed into place like he had decided he was not leaving anytime soon, and that alone unsettled me more than if he had walked out. "I already did," he said, calm, certain, and something in my chest tightened because I knew he was not talking about a friend or family or anyone who would simply check in and leave. This was different. Everything about him was different. "You should not be here," I added quickly, the words coming out sharper than I intended because fear always disguised itself as resistance. "You do not even know me." He held my gaze then, steady, unwavering. And for a second I felt like he saw every version of me I had tried to bury, The hopeful one. The broken one. The one who stayed too long. I know enough, he replied, and the certainty in his voice made it impossible to argue. I looked away first, my focus dropping to the thin hospital bracelet around my wrist, my name printed in black ink like proof that I still existed even if it felt like I did not. I am fine, I repeated, softer this time, less convincing, and he exhaled slowly, not frustrated, not impatient, just aware. No, he said quietly, you are not. And the words did not feel like judgment. They felt like truth, the kind I had avoided for too long. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard, trying to push it back down. But the effort made my head spin, and when I shifted slightly the room tilted with me, the edges blurring just enough to make me lose my balance even though I was still lying down. And then his hand was there, steady at my shoulder, grounding me. Without force, without demand, just enough pressure to remind me I was not falling alone. I froze at the contact, not because it hurt, but because it did not, because it was careful in a way I had forgotten was possible. And for a second I did not pull away, I did not flinch, I just breathed, slow and uneven. You need rest, he said, his voice lower now, closer, like the words were meant only for me. And I almost laughed at that, because rest felt like something for people who had somewhere safe to return to, people who were not left in rooms like this with nothing but questions and silence. I do not have anywhere to go, I admitted before I could stop myself, the truth slipping out because I was too tired to hold it in, too tired to pretend I still had control over anything. His hand stilled for half a second, just enough to tell me the words mattered. Then he straightened slightly, not pulling away completely. Not yet. You do now, he said, simple, final, like a decision had already been made somewhere I could not see. And before I could ask what that meant, his phone buzzed once in his pocket, a single vibration that seemed louder than the monitor beside me. He glanced at it briefly, his expression unchanged, unreadable, and when his eyes returned to mine, there was something different in them, something settled, like a line had been crossed, and there was no going back. It is taken care of, he said, and I did not ask what he meant because deep down I already understood that whatever he had set in motion had nothing to do with chance, and everything to do with me. I should have felt relief when he said it was taken care of, but instead something unfamiliar settled in my chest, something heavier than fear, but steadier than panic, and I did not know what to do with it. So I focused on the only thing I could control, which was my breathing, slow in, slow out, the steady rhythm of the monitor beside me guiding me like it had since I woke up. Except now, every sound felt sharper, more defined, like the world had shifted slightly on its axis without asking my permission. What does that mean? I asked finally, my voice stronger than I expected, but still fragile enough to betray me. He studied me for a second, not surprised by the question, not annoyed either, just measuring, like he was deciding how much truth I could handle. It means he will not come back, he said, simple, direct, and something inside me reacted instantly. Not relief. Not yet. But the absence of dread I had carried for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. I searched his face for something, anything that would tell me this was temporary, that the world would return to what it had been before. But there was nothing there except certainty, and that terrified me in a different way, because certainty meant change, and change meant I no longer knew the rules. You cannot just decide that, I said, shaking my head slightly, the movement making the room tilt again, but I forced myself to stay present, to stay grounded, because drifting felt dangerous now. People do not just disappear. His expression did not shift, but something in his eyes darkened. Not anger, not exactly. More like resolve. Some people do, he replied quietly, and the way he said it made it clear that this was not a discussion. It was a fact. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening again around the blanket as my mind tried to catch up, tried to piece together what was happening, who he was, why he was here, why he cared, because none of it made sense, not in the world I knew, not in the life I had been living up until a few hours ago. Why are you helping me? The question came out before I could stop it, raw and unfiltered, because I needed to understand, needed something to hold on to that was not just instinct and fear. He did not answer right away, his gaze dropping briefly to my hospital bracelet before returning to my face, like my name mattered somehow, like it meant something beyond just identification, because no one else did. He said finally, and the simplicity of it hit harder than anything complicated ever could. My throat tightened again, but this time I did not look away. I held his gaze, searching for a catch, for a condition, for anything that would make this make sense in the way I understood the world. But there was nothing, just that same steady presence that had filled the room the moment he walked in. The door opened again then, the nurse returning with a stack of papers and a cautious glance toward him. "We will need to discuss discharge," she said, her voice polite but careful, like she was aware of something she could not quite define. I felt the word hit me like a weight. Discharge. Leaving. Going back to a place that no longer existed. To a life that had already moved on without me. My chest tightened again, the fragile sense of stability cracking at the edges. "I do not have anywhere to go," I repeated, quieter this time. More real, more final. The nurse hesitated, her eyes flicking between us, uncertainty clear in her expression. But before she could say anything else, he spoke, his tone calm, controlled, leaving no room for doubt. "She is coming with me." The room went still. Even the monitor seemed to pause between beats, and for a second I forgot how to breathe, because those 5 words changed everything in a way I could not take back. I looked at him, really looked this time, searching for hesitation, for a sign that this was a suggestion, an offer I could refuse. But there was none, only that same unwavering certainty. And something in me, something small but stubborn, whispered that maybe, just maybe, for the first time in a long time, I did not have to be afraid of what came next. I did not say yes right away because something inside me had learned that nothing was ever that simple, that every offer came with a cost, every promise with a condition. So I just stared at him while the words echoed in my head. "She is coming with me," like they belonged to someone else's life, not mine. The nurse shifted awkwardly beside the bed, her pen hovering over the paperwork as if she was waiting for me to object, to refuse, to choose the safer option of staying where everything was. Familiar even if it hurt, but familiar did not mean safe. I knew that now. I had known it for longer than I wanted to admit. "I cannot just leave with you," I said finally, the sentence slow, careful, like I was testing each word before letting it exist. His expression did not change, not surprised, not offended, just patient in a way that felt intentional. "You can," he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, and maybe to him it was. Maybe in his world decisions were made like that, clean and final, without the weight of doubt dragging them down. But my world had never worked like that. My world had been built on hesitation, on second-guessing, on staying even when leaving was the better choice. "I do not even know your name," I added, because that felt important, because stepping into the unknown without something as basic as that felt impossible. He held my gaze for a moment before answering. "Dominic," he said, just that, no explanation, no last name, but somehow it was enough to make him feel more real, more defined. "Dominic." I repeated it silently, letting it settle, letting it anchor him to something I could understand. "Emily," I said in return, even though he had already seen it on my bracelet, even though part of me suspected he already knew, but saying it out loud felt like reclaiming something, like reminding myself that I still existed outside of everything that had happened. His eyes softened just slightly at that. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it. "Emily," he repeated, and the way he said my name was different, steady, deliberate, like it mattered, like I mattered. The nurse cleared her throat gently, pulling us both back to the present. "If you are being discharged, we will need a signature," she said, her voice careful again. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the paper as the reality of the moment pressed in. This was the point where everything shifted, where there was no easy way back. My chest tightened, doubt creeping in, whispering all the reasons I should not trust this, should not trust him. But then I looked up, met his gaze again, and what I saw there was not pressure, not expectation, just certainty, a quiet assurance that he was not going anywhere, that whatever this was, it was not temporary, and for reasons I could not fully explain, that mattered more than fear, more than doubt. My hand steadied as I took the pen, signed my name in a line that felt like more than just ink on paper. It felt like a decision, like a step into something unknown but necessary. The nurse nodded, collecting the paperwork, her expression unreadable but respectful, as if she understood more than she was saying. Dominic stepped back slightly, giving me space as I shifted carefully to the edge of the bed, the floor cool beneath my feet. Grounding. Real. I expected dizziness. Expected the world to tilt again, but it did not. Not this time. Maybe because I was not doing it alone. Maybe because for the first time in a long time, someone was there, not to control, not to take, but to steady. His hand hovered near my arm, not touching, just there if I needed it. And I realized the choice was not about where I was going. It was about who I was becoming. I took a slow breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped forward, away from the bed, away from the version of myself that had been left behind. And without looking back, I walked toward the door with him beside me. The hospital hallway felt longer on the way out, like every step was asking me if I was sure, if I understood what I was leaving behind, but I kept walking anyway, because stopping felt more dangerous than moving forward. The fluorescent lights stretched overhead in a line that never seemed to end, each one humming softly as we passed beneath it, and I became aware of the rhythm of our steps, mine slower, careful, his steady, controlled, always just half a pace beside me like he was adjusting. Without making it obvious, people glanced at us as we moved, nurses, visitors, strangers who paused for half a second too long before looking away, like they sensed something different but could not name it. Or maybe it was just him, the way space seemed to shift around him, the way doors opened a second faster, the way no one questioned where we were going. I had spent years trying not to be seen, trying to make myself smaller, quieter, easier to ignore, but walking beside him made that impossible. It was like being pulled into a world where hiding did not exist, and I did not know if that made me feel safer or more exposed. The automatic doors at the end of the corridor slid open with a soft hiss, and the air changed instantly, cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of rain against pavement. I stepped outside and paused without meaning to. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with clouds, the kind that made everything feel suspended in time, like something was waiting to happen. A black car idled at the curb, sleek, quiet, out of place in the same way he was, and I felt my chest tighten again, not from fear exactly, but from the realization that this was real, that I was actually leaving with him, that there was no one coming to stop me, no voice calling my name, no reason to turn back. "You can still stay," I said suddenly, the words slipping out before I could stop them, because part of me needed to know this was still my choice, that I was not being carried along by something I did not understand. He looked at me then, really looked, his expression calm but focused, like the question mattered even if the answer would not change. "Do you wanna?" he asked, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard, because he was not telling me what to do. He was asking, and for a second I did not know how to respond to that. I looked back at the hospital doors, at the place where I had woken up alone, at the empty chair that had said everything without words, and I felt the answer settle into place before I even spoke. "No," I said quietly, and that was enough. He nodded once, like the decision had been made, like it had always been mine to make, and then he opened the car door for me, not in a showy way, not like he was trying to impress me, just a simple gesture, controlled, deliberate. I hesitated for half a second, my hand brushing against the cool metal of the door, grounding myself in the moment. Then I slid into the seat, the interior quiet, insulated from the outside world in a way that felt almost unreal. He closed the door gently before walking around to the other side, and when he got in, the space shifted again, not smaller, just more defined, like everything inside the car existed on his terms. The engine hummed softly as the driver pulled away from the curb, and I watched the hospital disappear in the side mirror, growing smaller with every second, until it was just another building in the distance, just another place I used to belong to. "Where are we going?" I asked after a moment, my voice steady now, more curious than afraid. He did not look at me right away, his gaze fixed ahead as the city moved around us, lights reflecting off wet pavement, people rushing past without noticing the moment unfolding inside this car. "Somewhere safe," he said finally, and I almost asked what that meant, almost asked what safe looked like in his world, but something told me I would find out soon enough. So I leaned back against the seat, let the motion of the car carry me forward, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel like I was running. I felt like I was being taken somewhere I was meant to be. The city blurred past the window in streaks of gray and gold, rain beginning to fall in thin lines that traced the glass like quiet thoughts I could not quite catch. And I found myself watching the reflections instead of the streets, because looking too closely at where we were going felt like asking questions I was not ready to hear answered. The silence inside the car was not empty. It was controlled, deliberate, like even the quiet had a purpose. And I became aware of how different it felt from the kind of silence I was used to, the kind that pressed down on you until you could not breathe. This one did not suffocate. It waited, giving space instead of taking it. I shifted slightly in my seat, my fingers brushing against the soft leather beneath me, grounding, real, and I realized how tired I was, not just physically, but in a way that settled deeper, in the spaces no one could see. Dominic had not spoken since we left the hospital, his attention fixed ahead, one hand resting loosely near his knee, the other occasionally adjusting something unseen, small movements that spoke of control without effort. I studied him from the corner of my eye, trying to understand how someone could feel so present without saying anything at all. "You do not talk much," I said finally, the words slipping out softer than I intended. He glanced at me then, just for a second, but it was enough to feel seen again. "I talk when it matters," he replied, his voice even, unhurried, and something about that answer settled in my chest in a way I could not explain, like he was not filling space just to avoid silence, like every word he chose had weight. I nodded slightly, not trusting myself to say more, because part of me was still waiting for something to go wrong, for the moment when this would shift, when the calm would crack and reveal something else underneath. But it did not happen. Instead, the car slowed, turning onto a quieter street where the buildings stood taller, cleaner, their windows glowing softly against the darkening sky. The rain picked up, tapping gently against the roof in a steady rhythm, and I felt my shoulders drop just a little, tension easing without permission. We pulled up in front of a building that did not look like anything I had ever called home, glass and stone rising several stories high, the entrance lit with a soft, warm glow that felt intentional. Like even the light here was chosen carefully. The car came to a smooth stop, and for a second neither of us moved, the engine still humming quietly beneath us. I felt it again then, that moment of hesitation, that question of whether I was ready to step into whatever this was, because once I did, there was no going back to who I had been before. Dominic turned slightly toward me, not rushing, not pushing, just present. "You are safe here," he said, and the words were simple, but they landed differently this time, not like a promise meant to convince me, but like a fact he had already ensured. I searched his face again, looking for doubt, for uncertainty, for anything that would make this feel less real, but there was nothing there except that same quiet certainty, and for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not exactly, something steadier, something that felt dangerously close to trust. I exhaled slowly, my hand moving to the door handle before I could second-guess myself, the cool metal grounding me as I pushed it open, the rain softer now, almost like a whisper as it brushed against my skin. I stepped out, the pavement solid beneath my feet, the building rising in front of me like something out of a life I had never imagined for myself. Dominic stepped out beside me, his presence immediate, steady, and as we moved toward the entrance, the doors opened before we even reached them, silent, seamless, like everything here was already expecting us, and I realized then that whatever world he belonged to, I had just stepped into it, and nothing about me would ever be the same again. The lobby did not feel like a place people simply walked into. It felt like a space that decided whether you belonged before you even crossed the threshold. The floors polished to a mirror shine, the lighting soft but intentional, casting everything in a quiet kind of luxury that made me suddenly aware of every detail about myself. The hospital bracelet still on my wrist, the oversized clothes, the way I hesitated half a step behind Dominic without meaning to, but no one looked at me like I did not belong. In fact, no one looked at me at all, their attention fixed entirely on him as we passed, subtle nods, doors opening without a word, an elevator already waiting as if time itself had adjusted to his schedule. I followed him inside, the doors closing behind us with a soft sound that felt final, like the world outside had just been sealed away. The elevator moved smoothly, almost too smoothly, and I watched the numbers change without really seeing them, my reflection faint in the polished steel walls, A version of myself I barely recognized, quieter, but not as small as before. You live here? I asked, the question coming out softer than I expected. He nodded once. Sometimes, he said, and the answer was vague in a way that made me realize this place was only one part of a life I could not yet see. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto a private floor, the kind you only saw in movies, quiet, expansive, everything arranged with a kind of effortless precision that made it feel untouched, like no one had ever disturbed the calm that lived here. He stepped out first and I followed, my footsteps quieter now against the carpeted floor, the air warmer here, calmer, like even the building itself understood the difference between outside and inside. He led me down a short hallway before stopping at a set of doors, opening them with a simple motion that felt practiced, natural, the space beyond unfolding slowly as I stepped inside, wide windows stretching across the far wall, city lights glowing faintly through the rain, furniture placed with intention, nothing excessive, nothing out of place. It did not feel cold, but it did not feel lived in either, more like a place waiting for something to happen. I stopped just inside the doorway, unsure where to go, what to touch, how to exist in a space that felt so far removed from anything I had known. Dominic turned toward me then, watching, not impatient, not distant, just present. You can take the guest room, he said, his voice calm, steady. And I nodded automatically, because it sounded simple, because it gave me something clear to hold on to. Thank you, I added after a second, the words feeling too small for everything that had happened, but they were all I had. He did not dismiss them, did not brush them aside, just inclined his head slightly like they mattered, like I mattered. There are clothes in the closet, he continued, and anything else you need. I hesitated at that, because need was a complicated word, because I was not sure I knew what I needed anymore beyond the absence of fear, beyond the quiet that had settled around me since he walked into that hospital room. Why are you doing this? I asked again, the question quieter now, less defensive, more real. He held my gaze for a moment, and this time there was something different in his expression, not softer, but more direct, like he was choosing his answer carefully. Because you should have been protected, he said, and the words landed deeper than I expected, not because of what they meant, but because of what they implied, that someone should have stood there before, that someone should have seen, should have acted, and had not. My chest tightened slightly, but I did not look away. I let the truth of it settle, let it exist without pushing it aside. You are now, he added after a second, quieter, and something in my chest shifted again, not fear, not doubt, something steadier, something I had not felt in a long time. I nodded once, not trusting my voice, and turned toward the hallway he had indicated, each step slower now, more deliberate. Because this was not just a place, it was a beginning, and as I reached the doorway to the room and paused for a brief second, I realized something I had not expected. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what might finally be mine. The room was quieter than I expected, not empty, not cold, just still in a way that felt unfamiliar, like it was waiting for me to decide who I was going to be inside it. I closed the door gently behind me, the soft click echoing louder than it should have, and for a moment I just stood there, my hand still resting against the handle as if I needed something solid to remind me this was real. The bed was perfectly made, the sheets smooth and untouched, the kind of place that looked like no one had ever slept in it. And I wondered briefly if that was true, if anyone had ever stayed here long enough to leave something behind. I moved slowly, each step cautious, not because I was afraid of the space, but because I was not used to moving without watching for reactions, without bracing for something I could not predict. The closet door opened easily, revealing clothes that were not mine, but somehow felt like they could be. Simple, neutral, chosen without excess. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the fabric, soft, clean, untouched by memory, and something in my chest tightened again, not pain this time, something closer to disbelief, like I had stepped into a version of life that did not belong to me. Not yet. I changed slowly, carefully, the fresh clothes settling against my skin in a way that felt both foreign and comforting, like shedding something I had been carrying for too long. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I paused, really looked at myself for the first time since the hospital, and I almost did not recognize the person staring back, not because I looked different, but because something in my eyes had shifted, less guarded, less lost. I exhaled slowly, turning away before I could overthink it, and stepped back into the hallway, drawn by something I could not quite name. The apartment was quiet, but not empty. I could feel him somewhere nearby, the same steady presence that had followed me from the hospital. I found him in the living area, standing near the window, his back to me, the city lights stretching out below like a world that never stopped moving. He did not turn right away, but I knew he was aware of me, the slight shift in his posture giving him away. "You should rest," he said, his voice low, even, and I stepped a little closer, not too close, just enough to feel part of the same space. I thought I would not be able to, I admitted, because it felt easier to tell the truth here, easier than it had ever been before. He turned then, his gaze settling on me, taking in the change, not in a way that made me self-conscious, just noticing. "You will," he said simply, like it was not a question, like it was something he had already decided for me, and strangely, I believed him. The silence settled again, but it was different now, less uncertain, more shared. I leaned lightly against the edge of the couch, grounding myself in the moment. "What happens now?" I asked, because that question had been sitting just beneath everything else. Waiting, he held my gaze for a second, then glanced briefly toward the city before looking back at me. "Now you learn what it feels like to be safe," he said, and the words landed slowly, not all at once, like they needed time to sink in. I swallowed, unsure how to respond to something I had never really experienced before, unsure if I even knew what safe meant beyond the absence of fear. But before I could say anything else, his phone buzzed again, the sound quiet but sharp in the stillness. He checked it briefly, his expression unchanged, but something in the air shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like a ripple beneath the surface. He looked back at me then, his voice calm, controlled, but carrying something deeper underneath. "There are things you do not need to worry about anymore," he said, and I felt that same shift inside me again, that quiet, steady feeling that had started to take root, and, for the first time, I did not question it. I did not pull away from it. I let it exist, because something told me that whatever had been taken care of, whatever had been set in motion the moment he walked into that hospital room, was not just about ending something. It was about beginning something else entirely. Sleep did not come all at once. It arrived in pieces, like something testing whether it was safe to stay. I lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond the glass, the distant movement of a world that kept going no matter what happened inside it. And for the first time, I was not trying to keep up with it. I was just still, my body slowly unlearning the tension it had carried for so long, my mind quieter than it had any right to be. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected the past to rush back in, expected the same cycle of thoughts, the same questions, the same fear, but it did not come the way it used to. It lingered at the edges, weaker, like it no longer had the same hold on me, and eventually, without realizing when it happened, I fell asleep. When I woke, the room was filled with soft morning light, pale gold stretching across the floor and up the walls, and for a moment I did not move. I just watched it, letting the calm settle before reality caught up. But when it did, it was different. I did not wake with dread. I did not feel that immediate weight pressing down on my chest. Instead, there was a strange stillness, like my body had not yet remembered how to be afraid. I sat up slowly, the sheets shifting around me, and listened. The apartment was quiet, but not empty. I could sense that same presence somewhere beyond the walls. Steady, unchanged, I stood, moving toward the window, the city. Clearer now in the daylight, sharp lines, movement, life continuing as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed for me. I turned away, stepping into the hallway, drawn by instinct more than thought, and found him where I expected, standing near the kitchen this time, a cup of coffee in his hand. The scene so ordinary it almost felt unreal. He looked up as I approached, his gaze steady, assessing in that quiet way that never felt intrusive, just aware. "You slept," he said, not a question. I nodded, a small motion that felt more significant than it should have. "I did," I replied, and even to my own ears, my voice sounded different, less strained, less guarded. He studied me for a second longer, then gave a slight nod. Like that alone confirmed something he had already known. I hesitated, unsure what to say next, because everything felt new, undefined, like I was standing at the beginning of something without a map. I do not know what I am supposed to do now, I admitted, the truth simple but heavy. He set the coffee down, his movements precise, controlled, and turned fully toward me. You do not have to do anything, he said, and the words caught me off guard, because I had spent so long measuring myself by what I had to do, what I had to fix, what I had to endure, that the absence of that felt unfamiliar, almost unsettling. Then what am I supposed to be? I asked quietly, because that question mattered more. His expression shifted slightly then, not softer, but more focused, like he was choosing his answer carefully. Safe, he said, and the simplicity of it settled into the space between us. I let out a slow breath, absorbing it, not fully understanding it yet, but not rejecting it either, and for a moment, we just stood there, the silence no longer heavy, no longer something to fill, just present, steady, real. I glanced down at my wrist then. The hospital bracelet still there, a thin strip of plastic that felt like it belonged to a different version of me. I reached up, hesitated for half a second, then pulled it free, the soft snap echoing quietly in the room. I looked at it for a moment before setting it down on the counter, leaving it behind without ceremony, without regret. When I looked back up, his gaze was on me, steady as always. But there was something new there, something that felt almost like approval, not of what I had done, but of what it meant. I straightened slightly, my shoulders settling into a position that felt more natural, more mine, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I felt like I was standing exactly where I was meant to be, and as I met his eyes, I realized something I had not been ready to admit before. He did not just change what happened to me, he changed what I believed was possible. And somewhere between the silence and the certainty, between fear and something steadier, I understood that this was not the end of my story. It was the moment it finally began.